Good morning, friends. The church is already packed compared to what I imagined it would be this morning. So thank you for being safe and for braving the roads and being here to celebrate our 40th anniversary. That's what we're going to do today, is we're going to celebrate 40 years of OUC sharing God's goodness in the world. And so we're delighted that you're here to share with us. The way we're going to do that is we're going to move through each decade. And in each decade, we'll be singing a hymn that was popular or that was a big hymn during that decade. And we have a speaker from OUC for each decade to tell a little story or talk a little bit about what that decade meant to them and the life of our church.
My name is Dave Patterson. In 1978, my family and I moved to Common Glen North. One of the first things we looked into was a church to attend. While we tried out several churches in Ottawa, we longed for a united church closer to home. One Monday morning, while waiting for my bus, I started talking to a man in uniform and noticed that he had a cross on his uniform and asked him what faith community he was associated with. He informed me that he was associated with the United Church of Canada, and his name was Chaplain David Esty, who eventually became Chaplain General. My first question to him was, how do you start a church? We traveled on the bus every day and continued the conversation. There were a number of persons on the bus that overheard us and took interest in what we were talking about. This was the beginning of what was to be an experimental 6 months project. 40 years later, we known as Orleans United Church. I'd like to read part of a message that I received this week from Reverend Joanne Barr. Open-mindedness and creativity played a significant role when it came to finding a space for worship and maintaining it. We created a pop-up sanctuary in a local elementary school, held confirmation classes and boardroom meetings in the living rooms of the people's homes, and set up the church office in the trunk of her car. I am sure that there were frustrations along the way, but I only remember joy, the fun, and the laughter. It is assuring to know that the level of commitment and dedication, which was such an integral part of the early beginnings, has never diminished. May you continue to remain faithful to the Church of Jesus Christ. Happy birthday, celebrate, and best wishes to you, Reverend Joanne Barr. Our second minister was Reverend Jamie Goss, who unfortunately, after only 8 months, died suddenly. And our next minister was Reverend Tom Sherwood. It was a dynamic time of growth. And if you notice the next slide, this is what happens to somebody after 37 years. It was a dynamic time of growth within our personal faith and the faith community as a whole. Each Sunday, the thought was in my mind, and still is to this day, I wonder what's going to happen today. Each Sunday morning, the process of transforming a school cafetorium into a sanctuary was a large undertaking, with the team arriving at the school an hour and a half before the service to set up the sanctuary and 19 Sunday school classrooms. We had over 200 children. The congregation eventually realized that it was time to expand the church further, both literally and figuratively, and at the annual general meeting in January 1985, the congregation voted to build a house of worship. For me, the most exciting part of this decade was being part of Orleans United, was working and planning that allowed us to move into a facility that allowed us to be active 7 days a week. While it took a few years to secure the land and complete the planning, by 1988, construction was well underway. Much of the work was done by volunteers and the congregation who took time off work or used their holidays to learn how to build walls and to move material around for the contractor. My son and I did all the sound wiring for the entire building so that all the rooms could hear the church service. Every part of this facility has a story. Even the light fixtures that are painted a color plumb crazy. This facility has become what we had dreamed it would be, not only a place of worship, but a home where we could feel safe and continue to do God's work as we grow in our faith journey.
I have been asked to read a letter that was sent to us by a former member of the church, which I know most of you will recognize. Sorry he can't be here today. He's preaching somewhere else. There's a clue. 40 is a big round number. People see it as a milestone or a crisis. In the Bible, 40 symbolizes a significant experience, an especially blessed time, or a period in which God dramatically intervenes in human affairs. The symbolism is simple. The sacred and the human meet in the number 40 because it is the product of 4 and 10. 4 representing the 4 cardinal directions of creation, and 10 representing our 10 fingers. In Scripture, when we see the number 40, it says, something important is happening, or something important is about to happen. The 3 great kings of Hebrew history each reigned for 40 years: Saul, David, and Solomon. Coincidence? No. The number is symbolic, not historic precisely. Isaac married at 40, so did Esau. Mohammed was 40 when he received his call. The Quran says that 40 is the age when a man receives his full strength. In biblical times, a man was considered fully mature at 40. The story of Noah and the flood is full of 40s. So is the story of the 10 Commandments. Moses was 40 when he fled Egypt. It was 40 years later when he stood at the burning bush and heard God's voice call him to let my people go. And of course, the subsequent Exodus, the journey to the Promised Land, took 40 years too. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before beginning his ministry. The risen Christ appeared for 40 days between Easter and Ascension. Sometimes in life, we fear a 40th birthday and fret. The Bible celebrates 40 and anticipates something is about to happen. The future holds promise. And so it is with a congregation's 40th anniversary. In music, forte means loud and strong. In life, 40 can mean that too. Orleans United Church was established in January 1979. As you celebrate your 40th anniversary, the future holds promise. In your programs and your people, there is wonderful potential for life and more abundant life, and even loud and strong. Congratulations, best wishes, and may God bless you all. Love, Tom.
Good morning. I'm Paul Sales, and I've been doing a bit of research. I discovered that the United Church of Canada's name is actually as a result of a typo. It really was meant to be called the Untied Church of Canada, which could mean, hopefully this isn't the only thing you remember about my chat. Anyway, Sandra and I arrived in Orleans, on the doorstep of Orleans United, with the 2 daughters in 1992, after a 2-year search for a home for an Anglican parish in the Ottawa area. The primary attraction here was the amazing Sunday school. 2 full Sunday schools, one at 9 a.m. and one at 11. We discovered our community here. There were teachers from our daughter's school. Our family physician was here, and our optometrist was also here. It was reminiscent for us of the small-town community nature of the churches that we had both grown up in. At first, the transition was a bit of a challenge for me, a die-hard Anglican. As you've heard me say before, I was a gifted member of the Frozen Chosen. However, eventually, I learned to relax, and I settled in, so much so that within 2 years, I was leading the music ministry with Lorena Duncan and Pat Messier. The 1990s featured several milestones here at Orleans. For example, our 20th anniversary in service in 1999 featured a visit by the United Church of Canada's moderator, the Right Reverend Bill Phipps, who, as many of you will recall, had recently been on the front pages of all the national newspapers for stating that he didn't believe that Jesus was divine. It put the congregation in a slightly odd position, because as I recall, shortly after the elders wrote a letter of protest to the moderator for his position, the worship committee sent him another letter inviting him to celebrate our anniversary with us. I'm not sure how many people were aware of that. Another milestone was the introduction of our new hymn book in 1996 entitled Voices United. One of our own ministers, David Kai, who was also a great jazz musician, had served on the book's development committee. It was an exciting time to be leading music ministry in the congregation, as it brought new language and tunes to our worship. In ministry terms, I think of the 1990s as a time of stability. Reverend Tom Sherwood, from whom you just heard a letter, and David Kai, our diaconal minister, were our spiritual leaders for the entire decade. They were a study in contrasts, not only in their physical statures. Tom brought a dynamic and intellectual depth to his sermons, while David's quiet reflections reached many of us in a very deep, personal way. What struck me most, though, and it brought me firmly into the United Church fold, was the United Church of Canada's unflagging commitment to social justice and inclusiveness. Here at Orleans United, I became aware of the full meaning of inclusiveness, which became my own personal and professional commitment as your music director and later as one of the United Church of Canada's financial development officers. As we explored Voices United, I discovered a new hymn writer named Brian Wren. In his hymn, Bring Many Names, he articulates for me in a very personal way my thoughts about inclusiveness and all that we stood for at Orleans United Church, how we see the face of God in everyone we meet.
That one? That was 1999 in a nutshell. All of the world's computer systems were supposed to fail when that clock ticked over to the year 2000. Well, it didn't happen, of course. But what did happen in 1999? Well, for us, our youngest little one was baptized by David Kai right there. Now, when I look back on this turn of the millennium decade at OUC, there's kind of two themes that come to mind. One of them is friendships, and the other one is new pathways. So friendship started a little bit earlier, though, because I did stand up in the earlier decade. So in, I think it was 1996 in September, I sat back there with a little toddler, Jessica, and I was, I think, 7 months pregnant with Ben. Giselle was there with little Talia in her car seat, and she introduced herself. She invited me to tot time on Tuesday morning in the nursery, and basically, the rest of it is history. That's where my spiritual journey at OUC began, with that invitation. This decade had some comings and goings for us. In 2000 to 2002, we returned back to Halifax for a posting. But when we came back, of course, OUC welcomed us with open arms. That's what this congregation is all about. Sunday school and tot time became a very large part of my life in the first half of that decade. And that was when I convinced another newfound friend here at OUC, Pam Eisner-Parsh, to play the piano for our gathering time at Sunday school. We used to gather in the choir room and do some singing prior to the kids going to their classes. And eventually Dave Lawrence and I became Sunday school superintendents. Now, I'm guessing that we must have spent a lot of time together because there were a number of people in the congregation that actually thought we were married. And there was one Sunday morning where Talia had done the reading, the Bible reading in the morning, and I was told at the end of the service, well, my daughter did a wonderful job of the reading. And it took me a moment, and then I realized, oh, right, yes, no, I'm not a Lawrence. I would be proud to be, though, of course. Let's see. So it seems Christmas pageants. After time on Tuesday mornings, my youngest son Ted loved to go and visit Jean in the office, and they'd have a wonderful conversation. Rather ironic that Lynn, of course, ended up teaching math to that son when he got to Crean Wilson, which was kind of fun. Many Sunday school songs, many stories, many crafts marked the first part of that decade for me. And then I'm going to call it the change half of the decade. So I came to a point in my life where I needed a little something more. Volunteering at church, volunteering at school, volunteering in the community was wonderful, and it was very fulfilling, but I needed a little more of an intellectual challenge. So I did a lot of soul searching, talked a lot to God, had a lot of conversations, and through encouragement of family and friends, I decided to go back to school and get a teaching degree. So the year that I turned 40, I got my Bachelor of Education from the University of Ottawa, and that jumped in with 2 feet into a career in education, which has been very fulfilling. That meant I needed to step back from a lot of my volunteer commitments. So 2006, gave up Sunday school superintendenting, if that's a verb, and because of the kids sporting and activities on the weekend, there weren't a lot of Sundays when I was at church. So that was hard because I did enjoy that part of my life, but the very cool thing about this place is that no matter how irregular attendance is on Sunday mornings, there are always things to be involved with. So the women's retreat in the spring, many canoe trips in the fall, I was still able to attend, so that still kept me connected with wonderfully spiritual-filled people at this church. When I did come through the door on a Sunday morning, there was always a hug and a "we've missed you," and of course the ever-present "who the heck are you?" from those cheesy friends of mine. Now, because of this decade in this place, I have many of the most important friendships of my life, and also because of this place and this decade in this place, I have discerned my path in life, which for me has involved education. So yes, Sunday school can be a stepping stone to a career as a teacher, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. This place has challenged me in my faith journey, as well as made me feel very comfortable. And this church is full of people who are part of God's support system through both the celebrations and the challenges that we all face on our pathways through life. So I am very grateful that God encouraged me to sit in that pew 22 years ago.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Angela Fenton, and I just realized that my speech is not in my phone where it's supposed to be. The version is not there, so we're going to wing it a little bit. Bear with me if it's kind of clunky. I'm honored to have become a member of this congregation in the last 10 years, and I came here because of my daughter as she was being baptized in 2011, and I stayed because of the community that I found here. That process of going through baptism was so welcoming by Doran and Glenn and Molly that I decided to stick it out a few more weeks and just see if this feeling would grow, and indeed it did. Through the last decade, I have found kinship among my mom power group over here that buoys me more often than I can say. I've met a number of you in the congregation, and I've been witness to the changes and the transitions that you've been going through over the last decade. Many of us have become parents in this decade, which has been a big transition. I think adulting is very hard, and I'm very grateful to a number of you who have been coaches for us in helping us understand what this adulting business is all about. Some of you have transitioned into grandparents, and you've had the chance to spend time with your grandchildren that you might have missed when your own children were young. And it's been wonderful to watch that happening as well. Some of you have transitioned into retirement, that I say with quotes, because I think the ones of you that I talk to most often are busier than you've ever been, or are learning new things, or are off adventuring in the world. And I've loved literally having a front row seat watching that all happen around me. I've also been really blessed to watch some of the transitions over the last decade from a more formal perspective with a different front row seat as a member of our council and as our chair. It's been phenomenal for me to watch us transition through significant change in our leadership in the church, saying farewell to our beloved Glenn and welcoming our beloved Carolyn, welcoming Glenn back, and going through the process of adopting a number of new things to help the church sustain itself for the future so that our children can continue to come and explore and find God here. We've transitioned not only the physical building, but our council structure. We know that Presbytery is going through a big transition as well. So there's been no shortage of change over the last 10 years. I've also found myself growing the last 10 years and come to the realization that as I've ventured into adulting, I've also learned to pay attention more closely to the voice of God. And it hasn't always come, or ever, frankly, come to me through those beams of light or choirs of angels singing. It's come to me through the voices of my friends, through the voices of my parents, through the voices of the dear ones all around me, from our ministers, sermons, and children's time. The laughter that happens up here is golden God voice. And I've learned to listen and take action on that voice. Any of the big decisions I've made in my life, should I apply for the job, should I adopt the baby, have been guided from God. And I've listened, and I hope that you will join me in listening and noticing that voice of God coming all around us and join in taking action in the decades to come. Thank you very much.
40 is a sacred and blessed number, not just for our ancestors, not just in scriptural times, but the stories that we have heard today show us that 40 is a sacred and blessed number within this congregation. And so as we give thanks for all that has happened, for all the ways that God has been part of this faith community for 40 years, we look ahead trusting that God goes with us, that God will be with us, that the Spirit is leading us to still greater things, more opportunities to share God's goodness and love in this community and beyond. And so as we leave from this place into the world that awaits us, we know that we go with God's blessing to all that the future has in store for us. Let's stand and sing together our closing hymn, You and I.